Hello, my name is Mr. EpiX, and this video will be a first impressions look at the mid-season live patch 6.9. This video is not a tier list, and neither will it give you perfect knowledge on how to now play the mid lane with all the mage updates, but if you're still cool with that, stick around for a patch overview and some of my thoughts on the changes. Patch 6.9 is what Riot calls the mid-season update, where they follow up on their original goals for Season 6 from pre-season. I won't cover every single change, so I recommend you check out the patch notes yourself, which will be linked in the description, but the big changes to look at in this patch are mages and mage item updates, dragons, Rift Herald, turrets, spell vamp removal, boot enchantments, removal of Devourer and changes to Ginsu's, Quicksilver Sash, Grievous Wounds and CDR for more items. So now that we've gotten a small overview of what's included in the package, let's open it up. Starting with what people are probably the most excited about, let's get into the arcane depths of the major mage updates before moving on to the minor ones. I'm going to go ahead and go through each of them individually one by one, so here's a small list of them to click if you aren't specifically interested in blood explosions or burning the whole world. Vladimir has kind of always been up there in top lane. He does what he does and he annoys people trying to stop him from doing it. Usually what he does involves wave clear and sustain, but now he gets a bit more depth to his kit. If Vladimir casts Q twice, he will get Crimson Rush the next time the spell is available. Crimson Rush gives him a burst of movement speed, lets him deal double damage on his next Q, and lets him heal for a portion of his missing health for a few seconds. His ult now heals him on detonation per enemy hit, and his E is now a bit different. Vladimir charges up over 1 second to release a nova of blood missiles, each of them dealing damage to the first enemy hit in the area around them. Enemies hit by a fully charged nova will also be slowed for half a second. With the removal of spell vamp from the game, the power of the spells have also been slightly altered to make up for it, and he now has new fancy ability icons. I think the changes will make him a lot more fun to play, letting him play more risky to have chance to gain more advantages in lane and in trades. Charging E too long and missing it seems like a costly move, while his third Q can probably catch people off guard if they don't pay attention. Enter Malzahar, everyone's favorite Voidling master. Malzahar has gotten quite big changes, but the main thing about him is that he should now have more DPS and less burst, while still being able to stay alive a lot easier, being the sort of close range mage he is. He also looks a lot better. His passive has been changed completely and is now called Void Shift. A while after not taking damage, depending on his level ranging from 23 down to 6 seconds at level 18, he takes 90% less damage and is immune to CC until he takes direct damage from a non-minion source or until he blocks the CC effect. This makes him very hard to engage on both in lane and especially later in the game when he will shift in under 10 seconds after leaving combat. Malphite ults, Ahri flash charms and basically all hard engages that rely on a single CC spell are negated by his passive if he plays it right. His W, Null Zone, has been moved to his ultimate and is cast around the target but still affects everyone inside it. His new W is the Voidlings we all know and love, or don't love to play against. It summons a Voidling which in turn summons its own Voidling the first time it attacks a champion, large monster, epic monster, or assists in killing a unit. This newly spawned Voidling has the same remaining duration as the one it spawned from, and if Malzahar has 3 or more Voidlings active, they all gain 50% attack speed. They also gain 100 movement speed when moving towards targets affected by his E or ult, which is also their preferred targets. Malzahar jungle will now be more of a thing because of how safely he can clear without taking damage, letting his Voidlings help him through it. I think Malzahar will be a very reasonable pick against comps that rely on hard engage through what I mentioned earlier, and overall I'm looking forward to see what people manage to do with him. Next up is Cassia, who is now a bit different to play as well. Since Riot finally realized they should make the game more realistic, she can no longer buy boots. On the plus side, her new passive gives her movement speed per level and frees up an item slot for more AP. On the downside, it makes her a lot slower and lets opponents take advantage of it. She's a lot more rewarded for hitting her Q though, dealing more damage and giving her more movement speed than before. The biggest change for her is the new W. She now spreads venom in an arc in front of her at a fixed range. Enemies in it are poisoned, slowed and affected by a new mechanic called Grounded, preventing them from using movement abilities or things such as Thresh Lantern. The ability will take a bit of getting used to since it's different from most skill shots, since it will always go to max range unless you throw it against a wall. Her E is also changed and no longer resets cooldown if hit on poisoned enemies, however it now has a lower cooldown and deals more damage to poisoned enemies as well as heals her, so it evens out with a change in the passive. The damage of it when hit on someone that isn't poisoned is very low though, but the plus side is that if you E someone that isn't poisoned it doesn't go on a long cooldown. It also no longer gives more mana back than the cost when killing something, but now works like Annie's Q in that sense, giving a full mana refund. I think Cassiopeia's E feels a bit more clunky now because of the little damage it does on non-poison targets, and the fact that the effective cooldown of it, if you play correctly, is higher. What I mean by that is if you hit poison targets before the changes, the cooldown was reset to half a second, while it's now higher. She does now however have good use of CDR again, and you don't have to feel bad about buying items with it, which is nice. Zyra now spawns seeds around her through a new passive and is a lot more focused on the plants part of her kit. Her Q shape is now rectangular and slightly bigger and grows plants slightly outside the hitbox as well, letting her more easily set up her combos. Her W no longer grants CDR, but gives her plants more HP, and her ult now gives plants inside it 50% damage increase instead of attack speed. Because of the fact that Zyra has a lot more seeds to play with, I think plant placement will make or break how well she does in the game more than before. So, Brand. Brand was not a frequent pick until the Liandry's and Rylai's combo was made popular around the time people started playing him as a support. I don't know whether his main role will change after his update, but what I do know is that landing his combo on a full team is gonna hurt a lot. His new passive is the main thing to look at in his update. Blaze will now stack up to 3 times, and on the third stack it will detonate in a large area around the target, dealing percentage health damage in an explosion, and apply another Blaze stack to target's hit. Blaze itself also deals percentage damage over time like before, but now per stack, and the detonation damage now scales with ability power. Another huge change is that his ultimate will prioritize detonating Blaze on champions, meaning that it will both prioritize champions, unlike before, but also that it will hit targets with the most stacks to trigger explosions. The damage of his spells have been slightly lowered, but with his new passive I can see him being picked as even more of one of the best AoE mages in the game. Last up of the major mage updates is Vel'Koz. Vel'Koz will now be dealing true damage with his ultimate to anyone he manages to research. Researching someone is done just like before, looking them up on Twitter, Facebook, social media, proccing 3 stacks of passive on them. The passive now also scales with ability power, and the actual damage of the ultimate has been increased as well. This update will really push Vel'Koz to be the one mage you want when melting tanks and teams, provided he has enough peel to survive the enemy frontline while disintegrating them with a laser. Next up are 10 more mages that have all gotten changed on a smaller scale that try to push their identities apart from each other to make picking your champion more interesting. Although the parts will be shorter, I will again put a small list to each of the champions covered in case you're not interested in all of them. Anivia's ultimate now grows over 3 seconds and deals more damage, slows for more and slows for longer at max size. This will push her to have more control over the teamfight ground together with her wall. The Annie update is more of a Tibbers update, and a lot of her power is being moved to Tibbers instead of her flash stun burst combo. Her E now gives flat damage reduction up to 40% at max rank for a shorter duration, instead of magic resistant armor, which will let her more actively react to bursts like Zed's ult. Tibbers has also gotten some AI updates, and you can make him follow you by making him target yourself. His damage is increased and scales of ability power, and he will gain movement speed when moving towards Annie and regenerate health while outside of combat. He also enrages when summoned, gaining a heavy attack and movement speed bonus decaying over 3 seconds. Stunning someone also triggers the same enrage, and if Annie is killed, Tibbers will be healed for 50% of his missing health and rage, and target Annie's killer for vengeance, or the lowest closer targets if they're too far away. Fiddlesticks is getting his passive reworked to make him more mobile in fights. His passive will now give him movement speed after standing still for 1.5 seconds, synergizing with both his W draining and his ultimate. His E now bounces 7 times instead of 5 and prioritizes drain targets, and his ultimate gives your team a heads up ping when cast. Kennen is getting a bit more reliability added to his kit, making his ult always strike everyone inside it, now including non-champions as well. It will now tick half as fast and deal less damage per tick, but overall it will increase his ability to rush in and pop ulti and Sonya's to stun a few people. Swain's Q now lets him order his bird to a position where she will target the closest enemy, slow them and damage them over time. The Q will prioritize targets affected by E and deal double damage to minions. Overall is, in my opinion, just simply an upgrade of gameplay to Swain, instead of having 2 spells that are point and click damage over time spells. Syndra's passive is now more interesting, giving her maxed Q more duration and max W ability to pick up 2 more things for increased size of the throw. You could say it increases her potential. Veigar's passive is getting a rework, and the ult will now do damage based on targets missing health to avoid the potential one-shot damage while still making sure you can execute more targets like tanks. His passive will now give him a stack of AP, or as Riot likes to call it, Phenomenal Evil, every time he hits an enemy champion with an ability, as well as the previous Q stacking. This means that harassing people will be more rewarded in lane compared to before. Victor has more power put into his laser and ultimate, but has some reliability and burst removed. Overall, he will deal more damage if he manages to lock people down with his W and keep them in the ultimate, but less damage than before if he does not. His wave clear is however increased since his augmented laser now no longer deals less damage to target already hit from the initial damage, although the delay is increased to 1 second, making it harder to harass with. For the same reasons, the ultimate will now only tick once per 2 seconds after the initial damage, but deal a lot more damage than before per tick. I really like the changes for Victor because it increases his team fighting potential and in my opinion rewards skillful play more than before. Xerath gets some power towards his endgame fantasy of hitting all the ult shots in the form of more shots per rank. His Q is slightly thinner and the E stuns for less than before or for longer depending on the distance traveled. The ultimate is slightly wider, longer and gets 1 more shot per rank with 5 shots at rank 3. It now also zooms out the camera slightly and has updated particles. Siggs has now become the siege mage for taking turrets. His passive is buffed and his W can now execute turrets below 25 and 30% health left depending on rank. This will make him an interesting pick against someone you know will roam a lot because those turrets won't be standing very long. His ult no longer deals double damage to minions but has the cooldown reduced on higher ranks. That's it for the mages. Now let's move on to the mage items. This patch is all about the magic. The mana items are getting changed a lot to have different identities from just being what's the most cost efficient stat from what item. Tyr gets its mana regen removed but refunds 15% of all mana costs from spells used. The upgrades now also share this effect with 25% for Archangel Staff and 15% for Mana Mune. My impression of this is that it will be better for the people who already use Tyr and possibly make it a more reasonable alternative if you go out of mana often on other champions who don't buy Tyr a lot conventionally. Catalyst the Protector is getting a name change to Catalyst of Aeons and now has a new effect which makes you gain 15% of damage taken from champions as mana. Spending mana restores 20% of the mana spent as health, up to 15 per cast or 15 per second for toggle spells. This will fill the same role of sustain as before, but will be less reliant on leveling up in lane and more about trading. Chalice of Harmony now grants 100% base health regen if your current health percentage is lower than your mana percentage. It also works the opposite way and grants mana regen if your mana is lower than your health. Lost Chapter is a new item which builds into Morellonomicon and is tied more to its aggressive nature compared to Athene's. For 900 gold it gives 25 AP, 300 mana and restores 20% maximum mana over 3 seconds when leveling up, in the style of the old Catalyst. Will of the Ancients is getting removed from the game as the last spellvamp item, as the Hextech items are also getting reworked. Rod of Ages now gets the passive effect from the new Catalyst, but also keeps the stacking effect to stay as the scaling item if you need tankiness. Morellonomicon now grants 400 mana instead of mana regen, and has taken over Athene's effect of granting 20% maximum mana on kills and assists. The duration of Grievous Wounds is increased from 5 to 8 seconds, but it's lowered from against targets below 40% health to 35. Athene's is now a support or utility mage item for people that can heal or shield others. When dealing damage, before armor or magic resist calculations, you gain 20% of it as blood charges up to a cap. When you heal or shield an ally the next time, you consume the blood charges to heal that ally. I can see it working very well on aggressive supports or utility mages like Karma and Morgana. Abyssal Scepter now gives 10% cooldown reduction, scales with level, but the aura no longer affects minions. The AP on Sonya's Hourglass is going down from 100 to 70, but it gets 10% cooldown reduction added to it as well. The cooldown is going up from 90 to 120 to make more opportunities of counterplay, but the item itself is now only 2,900 gold, down from 3,500, making it much cheaper if you're mainly buying it for the armor and the active effect. Next up is the Hextech items. The Revolver no longer gives spellvamp, but now grants a passive effect with a cooldown that shocks enemy champions you basic attack every 40 seconds for magic damage scaling with levels. There are now 3 upgrades. The different items' effects all share cooldown, so there's no point stacking them, including the one from the basic Hextech Revolver. The first one is Hextech GLP 800, which is a tanky ice gun that builds from Catalyst and Revolver. It gains the Catalyst effect, 80 AP, 300 HP, 400 mana, and an active effect that shoots a cone of ice bolts that slow targets and deal magic damage, scaling on ability power. This item will be very interesting on slower mages that like to be tanky. It can be used for peeling, making sure you lock someone down enough to kill them, or even for wave clear. The second one is Hextech Protobelt 01, which has 60 AP, 300 HP, 10% CDR, and another active effect that lets you dash in a direction and release a nova of firebolts that deal magic damage. This can be a really useful item for champions that have abilities that can help out and engage but lack the means to close the gap, or even combo for a longer engage. It can also be used for mages who are immobile and want some safety in form of what could be considered an extra mini flash dash. The last one is the Hextech Gunblade we all know from before. It's very much still the same item, but the active is now instant, deals 250 magic damage and slows them for 40% for 2 seconds. The damage scales on 30% of your AP, and it's still what you want if you're going for any interesting hybrid build that has use for what Riot calls Omnivamp. So now that we're done with the magic bit, let's look at what changed in the jungle. First we have the new elemental magic dragons. Alright, fire, earth, air and water. The dragons spawning are now one of the 4 different elements and grant different effects. They can all spawn several times and the buffs stack. They're based on and very similar to the previous buff stacks of the dragons. The Mountain Drake gives bonus true damage to turrets and epic monsters for increased objective pressure. The Infernal Drake gives increased attack damage and ability power. The Cloud Drake gives movement speed out of combat. And the Ocean Drake gives an effect that gives you 10% of your missing health and mana back periodically. The minimap will indicate which dragon will spawn next, as well as a glowing rune inside the dragon pit. Only 3 elements will appear per game, and after 35 minutes it switches up to another dragon, the Elder Dragon. The Elder Dragon is what we previously had for a 5th dragon stack. It increases the effect of your current dragon buffs by 50% and grants a true damage over time effect on basic attacks and spells. This damage is increased by the amount of dragon stacks your team has, no matter what kind of dragons you killed. The Elder Dragon only respawns every 10 minutes compared to the Elemental one's 6, and the buff lasts for 2 minutes. The jungle on the top side is also getting an update, and the Rift Herald is now finally an interesting objective. It now only spawns once, and the buff is a lot stronger. The buff now lasts for 20 minutes and does not get removed if you die with it. It's very strong for dueling. The Rift Herald will be a bit tougher to take down, but for the effort you gave 5% damage reduction from champions and you built charges of corruption, which works a bit like Ludens and Static Shiv. At 100 charges, your next basic attack deals magic damage to the target, depending on your level, halved for ranged champions. The red and blue buffs are also getting changed a bit, and the red buff will slow more after level 11, and the health regen is increased to a lot more outside of combat with champions, turrets or epic monsters. The blue buff will now be a lot better throughout the game, as it gives 15% bonus ability power instead of the flat scaling one. It also has increased mana regen as well. For the last jungle update, there are now jungle timers for all buff camps. There will now be a small hourglass on the minimap 1 minute before a camp respawns, regardless of if you had vision of it being cleared or not. The hourglass will turn bright at 20 seconds before respawning, and it will give more opportunities for people to invade and make plays on the enemy side of the map. There are also many changes to turrets and how they work, but I won't go very deep into them. Turret damage is increased more quickly against the same targets, and the turrets are more tanky overall, but now other champions than just marksmen will be able to deal significant damage to them. The rewards for killing turrets are lowered in general, but the local gold for the outer turrets is increased slightly. Home Guard has also been nerfed, to give only half of its previous 150% movement speed at 20 minutes, and now scales up to the full amount at 40 minutes into the game. This can possibly have some effect on how teamfighting and defending works in mid-game. So, let's take a look at some of the rest of the champion updates, not only the mages. Illaoi is getting her E reworked a bit. You will no longer be a vessel for a minute and have to kill 3 tentacles, but for 12 seconds without being able to remove it through tentacle killing anymore. Soraka will now slow less and gain less movement speed from her Q, and the rejuvenation will no longer reset Windspeaker's Blessing. This will make her slightly more bearable to lane against. After an outrageous patch, Riot has decided that the Gem Knight needed to be tuned down a bit. His ranges on both his W and E are lowered slightly, but he gets a bit more mana to work with. Zack's passive now makes him revive faster on higher levels, from 8 down to 4 seconds at level 17, possibly making him a more urgent threat later in the game. There are also some pretty big changes to other items in this patch, and some are in my opinion very welcomed. Firstly, the removal of boot enchantments. I like this change because it almost never came down to a choice. When they first introduced boot enchantments, the majority of people bought Home Guard, and when they changed that, the large majority bought Alacrity instead. Distortion had a lot of value for some champions depending on the summoner spell setup, but overall I never felt like the design worked out in what I think was the intended way. The Devourer jungle enchantment is now getting removed as well and replaced with Blood Racer. Some older players might remember the item, but it's now an enchantment with a mini blade of the rune King effect on it, dealing 3% of the target's maximum health and physical damage. Ginsu's Rage Blade is getting a bit of a rework again, being made into a more expensive item but with the addition of the effect from Sated Devourer. It will now trigger the Phantom on hit effect for every second attack for not only melee but also ranged characters. This effect only triggers when Rage Blade is stacked to 6, which is the new maximum. Banshee's Veil is becoming cheaper with a better build path including Negatron Cloak but with less health. It effectively means that it's less efficient for a late game full build slot, but overall it's more accessible if you really need the effect. Quicksilver Sash and Mercurial Scimitar no longer removes all debuffs, but only crowd control effects. This is a very big change, especially for AD carries who are used to buying it against things such as Zed ult, but also other ones like Fiora and Trundle ultimates. We'll see what the results of this will be, but potentially Riot will change something if it turns out Zed is crushing everyone again. Hex Drinker and Maul Malmortius no longer stack with Styrex Gauge, meaning that the cooldowns will now share. This means bruisers and tanky assassins can no longer build both these aggressive items and be half unkillable, which I think is good. Sunfire Cape is getting its cost increased and its component Bummy Cinder is slightly less tanky, while Cinderhulk is getting a buff to its aura. Pink wards or vision wards will now only have 4 health but regen if you leave them out of combat, and blue wards now have a longer cooldown. Righteous Glory no longer gives allies movement speed but gives yourself more, and Warmog's armor now grants CDR but slightly less health. Grievous Wounds has been reverted to its previous state of reducing all healing by 40% and not just self-healing. Yes, this is a Soraka nerf. So, this video ended up being a bit longer than I expected, but I hope you enjoyed it and picked up a few of the changes. If you have more questions or suggestions for what type of video I should do next, feel free to drop a comment below. Thanks for watching, and I will see you on the Summoner's Rift.